More breaking news tonight. An exclusive report in the New York Times documenting the lengths to which sources say President Trump was prepared to go to stop migrants crossing the southern border. Just a few of the remarkable details that White House insiders told the New York Times. The president, they say, wanted a water-filled trench filled with alligators or snakes to be constructed as a barrier in addition to the wall. And apparently talked about it so much that White House personnel actually went and tried to price it out. Also suggesting that migrants be shot in the legs to slow them down or stop them. The story is incredibly fascinating. The details remarkably reported. The Times' Julie Hirschfeld Davis and Michael Shear share this. It's a new book that's coming out October 8th. The book is called Border Wars, Inside Trump's Assault on Immigration. Again, it comes out October 8th. Both are CNN political analysts, and they join me as well. I mean, this reporting is just astonishing. You've been working on this for a long time. Just if you can, just kind of broad strokes, how serious was the president talking about shooting migrants in the legs and, you know, alligators and snakes?
Well, I mean, he was definitely very serious about being enraged, really, that he couldn't get his arms around this problem. And the conversation about shooting migrants in the legs came, you may remember, after he suggested publicly that if migrants threw rocks at Border Patrol agents who were there across the border, that they should treat it as a rifle and essentially shoot to kill. He was quickly told by his staff that is not legal. We can't use lethal force unless we're defending ourselves. And so instead of dropping the idea, he was so desperate to try to figure out some way of holding people back that he then pretty seriously raised the question of, well, what if we just shot them in a non-lethal way, just to slow them down, just to deter them. He was really looking for ways to slow people down, to stop them from coming, to deter them from even trying. And I think importantly, the people that we spoke to really told us that it was hard to tell when he was serious about some of these things. He did keep asking about a trench filled with water. He would raise these possibilities of having snakes or alligators or other sort of countermeasures as part of that. And they never really knew, is he musing, is he just angry, or is this really something that we need to seriously consider? But in the case of the trench, they did end up pricing it out and finding that it would be 3 times as expensive as a wall.
A trench with, is that including the snakes or the alligators? Or
I'm not sure they ever priced out the animals.
I was trying to figure out who would they call to price out? But I mean, it's not just, he talked about electrifying the fence, having sort of flesh-piercing stakes on top of the electrified fence, and even painting it matte black.
Right. The matte black, he would call it flat black, and he would raise this all the time with Kirstjen Nielsen, with others in the DHS. The idea was that the fence would get so hot that it would be too hot to touch and would burn people who tried to climb up it. I think the big picture here is that from before he became president, he was obsessed with the idea of stopping migrants from entering, and he's been frustrated at every step of the way, partly by logistics and practicality. Some of these things are just not practical, but also by his own staff. And the frustration that built over the first 2.5 years of the administration was as much with the people around him who were raising the practical problems. No, Mr. President, would cost 3 times more. No, Mr. President, it's not practical. We don't have the materials wouldn't work, or
you can't take the people's land to build on.
Exactly. And so one of the things that we talk about in the story today and in the book more broadly is the way in which all of this led him to get rid of the people around him. I mean, ultimately, the week that we document in the paper today ends with him firing Kirstjen Nielsen, who was his Homeland Security Secretary, and over a very tumultuous and troubled sort of 1.5 years or so. But he did that with a lot of other people too, and it was because they didn't want because some of them challenged internally what he wanted to do, and that frustrated them.
And it didn't stop with Kirstjen Nielsen. I mean, based on your reporting, then it was a slew of people who Stephen Miller and others believed weren't sort of sufficiently supportive of. But this is a corner that this is a trap of the president's own making. I mean, he made promises, obviously, during the election, which, saying that Mexico was going to pay for the wall, and it's going to be this big, beautiful wall with a beautiful door in it, and, all the various promises he made. Without any, there were many other Republicans on those debate stages saying, this is not going to happen. What you're talking about is made up. His aides were the ones who had the unfortunate job of actually saying those same things to him of, the rubber hit the road. You can't actually build it like you're talking about.
Right, and this is one of the themes throughout the book, and frankly why we wanted to do this particular book is because this is kind of a theme that keeps coming back in Donald Trump's presidency, that he made all these promises, he talked in these grandiose ways about things he wanted to do when he was in office, but then he comes in and confronts the reality of governing. A lot of the logistics and practicalities, as Mike said, weren't working out, but also the law would not allow him to do a lot of the things that that his impulse guided him to do. So, for instance, the story talks about how he wanted to completely shut down the U.S. border, and he repeatedly talked about wanting to use the U.S. military to essentially police the border, which you can't do. But even when we talked with him in the Oval Office at the very end of the process of writing this book and asked him about it, he still seemed very disappointed. He said, I could have 100,000 and the best military of the world, and I still can't stop people from coming. So he continues to be really angry and frustrated with the limits of his power as president.
And one of the things he said down when he once on a trip to the border is he's told border agents, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong in your reporting, essentially that they should just stop allowing anybody in, nobody in, and that whatever trouble they got in, he would, they would be okay. To the point that as soon as he left, the Border Patrol agents, their boss told them, look, ignore what he just said. You do not have the right to just.
Right. This was a moment where the phrase that the president started using that day in that trip, and we were both down at the border that weekend, was that the country is full. That the country is full, and so he told the border agents in this sort of room, this sort of back room after he had done a photo op in front of the wall, just say that the country's full, turn people away, you just don't have to approve them. And it was a striking moment that underscored everything else in the story, which is that, administration officials were constantly having to kind of walk the president back from the precipice, right? Walk him back from the edge of what could be a crisis, whether it's, the actually closing the border, which they got, Republicans and business types and others to say this would destroy the economy, or whether it's legally saying to people he works for, you can't do that. That's not.
Yeah, it's fast. I mean, it's incredible reporting. I look forward to the book. Thank you so much, Julie Hirschfeld Davis, Michael Shear. Again, the book October 8th, correct?
Yep.
All right, look forward to it. With Capitol Hill